Hello, everyone. Today we are going to cover something quite different than usual. This is the community call of pTokens, and normally we answer to questions related to pTokens, or we discuss with the community anything pTokens related. Today we have three guests that I will shortly introduce, and what we are going to do is basically discussing how we could drive DeFi adoption on the trading front. So the guests all are all participants in the community that are trying to improve the experience of trading in DeFi, especially on decentralized exchanges. So what we have today, Steven from EOSfinex. Hi, Steven. Thanks for joining.
Hello, Thomas. Hi.
We have Deniz from Kyber.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
And Asaf from Bancor. So maybe we can, hi. Thank you all guys for joining. And if maybe we should start with an introduction of everyone. So as for myself, very quickly, I think people joining are used to hear me speaking during those kind of calls. So, you know, I'm the founder of pTokens, and I've been in the space for a while. I'm not really an expert on the trading front. So it's great today to have like people who have worked on decentralized trading for several years, so we can get their insights on how to you know, use the power of decentralized finance for trading. So maybe we should start with Steven. Steven, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been working in blockchain and crypto for about 5 years now. Previously, I was working on online gaming and sports trading technologies, actually. And then more recently, about 1.5 years ago, I joined EOSfinex as the first product manager. So that was a crash course in exchange trading. So since then, yeah, since last year, I've been also the product lead on EOSfinex, which is our efforts at decentralized trading.
Excellent. Deniz, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Deniz. I'm from Cyprus, and I've been involved with crypto since 2016. And I got into Ethereum back then, like since day one, and I've been down that rabbit hole. And over time, I ended up at Kyber Network, and Kyber Network, just briefly, is just a liquidity protocol that allows anyone to swap one token to another, and it has these unique ways of bringing that liquidity and pushing it downstream to dApps that maybe we can get into later.
Cool. And Asaf, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I've been part of the Bancor team since early 2017, just before the ICO. Bancor is basically a company who's doing AMM, the original OG and AMM in that sense in the space. Autonomous market maker is using smart contracts to convert any token to any token in that sense.
Excellent. We'll dive deeper into these topics later on, hopefully. So let's get started. So I've been in the Ethereum space pretty much since the mainnet launched, and I remember one of the first applications that I saw there was about you know, having Bitcoin on Ethereum for trading purposes. For instance, I don't know if you guys recall it. There was a project called BTC Relay that was specifically designed for that, and other use cases on Ethereum at the beginning were all about you know, getting price feeds for real world assets, and you know, DeFi was really one of the very first topics being discussed, but the network was just, you know, way too early. And I think something that we learned as a community in the first few years of existence of those blockchains is that you know, it's not enough to build a technology for the users to just come and use it. What we need to do is like lower the entry barrier and much more. So my first question for you guys, and I would start from Steven, since I think that since Steven works at both pTokens and EOSfinex, so it's somehow in between the traditional like centralized exchanges and the decentralized ones. I would like to understand how do you think we could drive adoption of users, and why is it important, and how can we convince users that normally use centralized exchanges to move to decentralized ones. Why would they do that, and how do we get there?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's only really, it might seem obvious, but it hadn't occurred to me that I work at both a centralized and a decentralized exchange. But so unsurprisingly, I didn't actually say this before, but like we have an upcoming launch on the mainnet, and the launch that the exchange that we will launch will actually be a hybrid non-custodial exchange. So if we're talking about decentralized trading, we wouldn't necessarily describe ourselves as a decentralized exchange. We'd say we're a hybrid non-custodial exchange. And what that means is that we take like off-chain technologies and we combine those with on-chain technologies. And really the reason for that is because after kind of a lot of lessons learned in trying to run a DEX on an EOS sister chain, some pretty hard lessons. What we came to kind of understand is that really to do this right and to be successful with user adoption and to move people from centralized exchanges to decentralized exchanges is that you kind of have to be a bit pragmatic about it. So in our view, maybe sometimes trying to run an exchange fully on chain is not to say overly ambitious, but maybe comes with some drawbacks. So for us, what we want to do and how we see adoption really picking up is to solve what we think is the major issue for all DEXs, which is illiquidity. So we think that this whole conversation about the difficult or steep learning curve for non-custodial wallets, we kind of see that as less of an issue because we see nice development there. There's loads of really amazing technologies coming out, new ways to handle seed phrases and private keys and stuff like this. So what we want to do to see semi-professional and professional traders come from centralized exchanges is to solve the issue of illiquidity. And when we say that, what we're talking about really is cost. We want to make it so that you can trade any amount in a non-custodial way for let's say not amateur or hobbyist trading, but real professional trading. So that's what we want to try and do, and that's what we see as the biggest obstacle.
Cool. I'm curious also to know like what's the point of view of Deniz and Asaf, since they are both on Ethereum mostly, even if Bancor is multi-platform. But Kyber right now is like operating on Ethereum, and Bancor, from my understanding, most volumes on Bancor are still happening on Ethereum. So I'm curious to understand how you guys see, for instance, the network congestion affecting the onboarding of new users, and how much it's a pain point for your current user space.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I agree with Steven that, the supply side is very important as well, because if you don't have the liquidity, then you have a maximum cap of people anyway, so it's important to be able to increase the capacity of the number of users that are there. And I mean, as you highlighted, the gas cost is a problem, but that's where things like, either layer 2 can come and solve it in the next 2-3 years. So that's one aspect that has to be solved. But then we're also seeing that, okay, many people are price inelastic in the sense that they don't care that much about the slippage as long as they can make the exchange, because we mustn't forget that one of the reasons they use this is the convenience. The fact that you don't have to wait for a number of deposits before you can trade, the fact that you don't have to hold your passport and pass a KYC, there's still tremendous benefits that make it worth having to pay, okay, for the last 2 months, maybe 1, 2, 3 euros, dollars, whatever it is. But overall, I think it's important to highlight that, there's a huge convenience factor in here, in being decentralized, in being completely in control of your own assets, so you don't give custody to a centralized exchange. And that has a small price in the sense that it's a bit more expensive, and right now it's a bit slower as well. But these aren't obstacles that can't be overcome the next 2-5 years by building on everything that we are doing, right now.
Yeah, I think what Deniz mentioned is right. When we launched Bancor in 2017, what we had in mind was user journeys. We were trying to make the best onboarding process. I used to tell my team is we want to create a situation where my dad can come into crypto and start doing all these activities and all these interactions. And at some point we kind of realized that the technology and the mass audience, mass market, they're still far apart. The gap is still too wide to bridge. And for that, we need to do baby steps. And that's why we improve like thing after thing after thing, and we get slowly closer to the mass market. And over the last 3 years, we've done a lot of changes in the way we approach things and where we see things. And the technology has matured a lot during these last 3 years. And so, you know, every blockchain has its own like benefits and disadvantages. On Ethereum, as you've mentioned, yes, there is the fact of gas cost and congestions. On EOS, you have the cost to onboarding cost to even create a wallet costs you money. These things, there are barriers, and you know, as we've tried to get more people into the systems throughout the years, we paid and we covered and we tried to make things a bit more simple and streamlined. And eventually, what Deniz said is right. When we have a DeFi ecosystem, and this is basically the first utility of blockchain, people care more about the trade and the prices and the flexibility and the fact that there is no KYC in that sense. And if you are able to accommodate this first and foremost, then you really can target the market that is already available and interested in the product. And this can get you into a position where you are expanding your services and getting closer to the mass audience that follows. So it's a journey that we're all sharing in evolution of technology in that sense.
Cool. So what we are saying is that basically it will be a multi-step process, and that we are at the beginning of that process, and there are several challenges. One is liquidity, for instance, and another one is UX. Yet the entry barrier could be seen as lower compared to centralized exchanges, because you don't need to sign up, you don't need to you know, do KYC and anything like that. And I think this is actually like one very strong driver for DeFi right now. Something that I was curious about to ask you guys, since I'm not much into those kind of details of decentralized exchanges, and which I think could be a challenge for UX, is like, how do you cope with like transactions finality? Like for instance, on EOS, there is the concept of irreversible blocks. So after say 3 minutes, you can consider a given you know, block as final. So its transactions are sort of irreversible and you have finality. On Ethereum, you can, I mean, you can use probability to reach a similar level of certainty. Yet, I guess, like all DEXs try to give like a feedback to the users as early as possible, like once the transaction is confirmed, after one confirmation. So did you ever have users that were confused or complaining because maybe their transaction got reversed because there was, you know, a fork and their transaction didn't, you know, end up being executed as they initially expected? Does anyone want to share its experience on this front?
So I'll go, if it's okay, I'll start.
Sure, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Basically, in the process of finality, you know, at the beginning, there were this conversation about finality and micro forks and how long you need to wait. And I think, if I remember correctly, Kyber had the same thing. We used to wait on Ethereum. We used to wait like 30 blocks or something like that. It'd be like 5 or 7 minutes until you actually indicate that the transaction went through. And as the system evolved, we kind of realized that you can be on a safer side with faster feedback to the user. It's still not 100% guaranteed that the transaction will go through. But overall, you get to a point where sometimes, even on EOS, Sometimes after it's 3 to even 7 blocks, which can be a matter of seconds on EOS or less than a minute on Ethereum, you can be at like 99% guarantee to have finality. So you can be more comfortable in indicating that this is gone through. And yes, it's a process of really finding this like middle ground. On the one hand, finality from the blockchain, but on the other hand, it's also a matter of how you communicate this back to the user. So if you have this like unknown territory when you send a transaction and then nothing happens, obviously the user get confused and get scared that something is off. But if you communicate this message to the user and you have this like type of a pending process going on, people are getting a bit more used to this fact that something is interacting with them and something is happening in the background.
Although, I mean, I don't know the data, but how often does that happen? I can't imagine it happening too often. It sounds like such an edge case. And then in that case, you know, it just looks like it hasn't gone through. So the user would have to just go through it again after probably confirming on Etherscan, just making sure that no, it really hasn't gone through, and then he'll just put the transaction through. But I mean, I hadn't thought of it because I don't know how rare is if it's 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 transactions, or I don't know if you guys have any insight into that.
I think last time we've checked, sorry, Stephen, last time we've checked on Ethereum, it was in the range of 98 or 99% of the transaction go through. They get like good amount of finality from block 1. And I think it gets to like very, very close to 100% after like 5 blocks already or 6 blocks. On EOS is pretty much the same numbers in that sense. You have like, if you wait to the sixth block or something, you get to very close to 100% finality. So if you understand that this is very close to finality, but there's still like a risk factor of a very, very limited risk, you can communicate this back to the user. And obviously, like on Bancor, we tried not to send users to Etherscan or any of the EOS Sparks or whatever it is that show you with transaction directly from the blockchain, because we wanted to create this user interface that helps you navigate through the process as easy as possible. So I think this is like part of the communication. We're trying not to send users out of the system and like kind of go search for a transaction on this like complex systems.
Yeah, the part where I build on that, what we kind of encountered, or the issue that we encountered, let's say what we learned was pretty much the same. The occurrence of, you know, completely failed transactions which we thought were going to become irreversible and then didn't. On EOS, it's gotten much, much more reliable recently, but then you had periods, you know, where it spiked and it got pretty bad when there was congestion, you know. But even, you know, when you're at the point where even it's only, and, you know, in some of the best of times, it's still 1 in a few thousand, let's say 1 in 2,000 or 1 in 5,000 transactions. Like on paper, that looks pretty good. But, and, you know, and the vast majority of your users are not going to be affected. But what it does rule out is maybe like more serious trading, right? Because no professional trader who really wants to actually run a strategy is going to take that kind of risk, because all of their decisions are based off of the orders which have been executed, cleared and settled before. And if they don't have, you know, 100% certainty, which is more or less what you have with the centralized exchange, they're turned off, you know? I guess another thing with it too, which is less important for liquidity protocols, but another issue with that would be market makers. You know, they're running just extremely high volumes of transactions, and 1 in 1,000 stacks up really, really quickly in the period of just a day, you know? So it makes it really impossible. And yeah, market makers, not so important for liquidity protocols, but in general, if we're talking about actually really growing the space, getting to really high volume, getting to really deep liquidity, sooner or later you need them, you know? So yeah, you know, we think with EOS, you can get to the point, where you're, you know, to many decimal places of reliability, but you probably want to get to 100%. So EOS had planned to do 3-second finality, right? That would be a lot better, but I guess we don't know when that's going to happen. That could be a while.
I think I just wanted to point it out that we do have a lot of market making activity on Ethereum and also on EOS. There's been quite a good amount of market making activity, and what they're doing is basically they're using contracts in order to identify what is the status of the transaction prior to theirs or following theirs in that sense, and they know to abort if needed. So it's not that they market makers are smart. They're smart traders, and they find a way of working with any system that they come across. So give them the credit in that sense.
Cool. So I guess what we're saying is that the problem is there, but it affects a minority of users. So as Asaf is saying, I will quote a couple of things from you. So the last one is that market makers are smart. So I mean, of course, every time there is the opportunity to make some profit, they will find a way to maximize it and to do it more efficiently, right? At the same time, at the beginning, you said it's a process of communicating to the users, which is very different the one they are used to having on a centralized exchange. Indeed, you are not sending them on a block explorer like Etherscan, because they risk to be confused. Like they see extra complexity and things like that. They are not used to, seeing on a normal exchange. So yeah, I guess that that's still not a major issue, as things got better on both EOS and Ethereum. But even if we just have 0.1%, the number of users we could have in a few months' time will be like in the orders probably of tens or hundreds of thousands of users. So there will be several users potentially being affected. So I guess we need to do a better and better job in communicating to users and educating those users. Explaining why it's different from a centralized exchange and what every action really means. It's not that after one block you can guarantee to the users 100% that his order has gone through and it has been executed as intended. So since it's like a paradigm shift and it's basically very different from centralized exchanges, even if we are trying to make it look like it's a centralized exchange user experience, what are you guys doing to, if anything, to educate users, and how do you see what is your role in the community within your project, how, and most importantly, what I would like to understand is how does how do your users see yourself and your role? Do they see you as the sort of coordinator or something like that? Are you the developer, or are you the main educator behind a protocol? I think there is a very thin and a very narrow difference between some of those concepts, but I think going forward it will become increasingly important. So I am curious to understand what's the difference between the different approaches you guys are taking and what you're doing on the education side. Does anyone want to start?
Okay, so I'll go.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the work that we're doing is educating the market. I think any company and any project that currently exists on Ethereum or EOS is here to educate, because the vast majority of people are not familiar with these blockchains and these technologies. They don't understand what's going on yet. So even though we say it's so intuitive and it's so easy to understand, and we're doing the same thing that you've done before, only on blockchain sometimes, they still need to understand what is this technology, what is going on with why do I need 12 words for a wallet, for example? Why do I need to wait 12 blocks for finality? What does that mean that I cannot recover my funds if I lost my password or something like this? All these different barriers that exist in the ecosystem, these are things that we have to educate the market and understand how to address it in a good professional way. I was actually very surprised because initially we launched Bancor with a connection to MetaMask, And it was working, but most of the people that came in said, "What's going on? I don't even know how to use MetaMask." And it caused us to really like integrate a wallet within the platform, because people wanted this type of experience of something simple, something that they don't need to be overly complicated developers or feel like they are developers in order to interact with. I think this is like what we see evolving in the ecosystem, is really like educating the audiences, making them address different issues, making them accommodating them on the process, on the journey, and at the same time improving the technology, improving the underlying processes that exist, in order to make it simpler and more user friendly. And you know, you've seen, if you hear from Stephen here, the connection between DeFi and centralized exchanges, in such a way that allows people from a centralized exchange to kind of migrate slowly and like easily into the DeFi world. This is definitely something that we are participating in and educating the market in the process.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think not just like for the stuff you said and like educating the market, it's also important to be as transparent as about what's happening and kind of like present what's happening, give an explanation of it to such a broad range of users that you're also covering the top 10% of the people who are interested in this. Because what we're seeing is people have come in from different backgrounds, from finance, from engineering, and I think there's there might be some gaps of knowledge that aren't too apparent, and so sometimes we're thinking too much from one angle. You know, like for example, DeFi has been going on for a couple of years now, and there's this focus on total value locked, TVL, you know, and for a while we were seeing, okay, the growth of this market is represented by TVL, but then we thought that is so faulty because total value locked up only works for example, for platforms that have to lock up something, and not every kind of DeFi project needs to lock up something to guarantee another asset as collateral. You know, for example, Kyber. There's different kind of market makers on there that have funds across different centralized exchanges, and they're actively rebalancing. They have different wallets. So one product might need 1/10 of the value locked up as another one to have the same percentage of slippage. So to provide the same amount of liquidity. But that's why, you know, it's like nuances like this where people aren't too aware that there's a lot going on. So that's why we, you know, always publish blog posts about these kind of things, about liquidity, about market depth, about what it means, what does total value lock mean, different kind of market makers. So, you know, it's been, you know, fun just pushing out these kind of more technical blog posts and having these kind of discussions as well.
I think you know, if I look, I've been working in product design for the last 10 years or so, and every company I worked with, they start off with some kind of a KPI, and then shortly after they adjust the KPI, and then after that they adjust it again. And I think DeFi on Ethereum basically is going through the same process. Like initially you have this hype about one parameter that makes sense, and then you realize that this is not really what you want to measure. And so you move to the next thing, and then you move to the next thing, you move to the next thing. And this is like part of an evolutionary process of any system. So it makes a lot of sense to do this process, right?
Now there's yield farming as well. Sorry, just to mention, I just said now the whole fashion is all that yield farming and putting it into compound and changing from different assets to different assets. You know, it's good to talk about this stuff as well.
I was just actually going to make a comment on that too. Like it's incredibly complex. If you ignore all of the blockchain requirements, what you need to learn there, and you ignore private keys, and you ignore all of this, yield farming in and of itself it's kind of ridiculously complicated, right? So you're trying to do all of these things already. Like if you, for us, when we've been talking about it before, like I feel like if you divide the market just into two segments, and you're talking about pretty basic users who are new, and they're just getting interested in different tokens, and then you're talking about professionals, you know, for people who are new to the space, they're still trying to get familiarized with what slippage is. You know, you try and talk to people about slippage, and they kind of, they don't always get what you're talking about. you look at things like if you look at all the ranking sites, I won't name any in particular, okay, but the conversations are still around volume, which is just so. I mean, your comment on like the kind of adjusting KPIs, I think, is a really relevant one. The fact that we're still talking about volume like it's a really good indicator of liquidity and a really good indicator of what is underneath that, the cost, So then, and then for, I think one of the things that we're trying to do is for these more professional traders who they understand all of this, try and make the cryptographic layer, try and make that as easy as possible for them. I mean, you'd made a good point earlier on, Asaf, about that market makers they're obviously really, really intelligent people, but a lot of them are super lazy as well. Like if, they no offense to them, right? I mean, they're lazy in a smart way that makes sense for them. They go to the exchanges and they go to the places where they can just spin up their strategy again and again and again. And when you start imposing on them these requirements to add in a cryptographic layer and they have to learn all of this, a lot of them will just go on to the next thing. That's kind of like an easier win for them. So I think a nice thing to do would be to start open sourcing libraries that allow them to do this really easily. I think there's some that already exist, right? But kind of formalizing that and making it nearly into like an onboarding process that targets this particular segment is something that could be done really well.
Cool. So Steven, basically what you're saying is that if there is too much friction, not even market makers will be encouraged or will be motivated enough to come under certain circumstances, right? Yeah,
I don't want to be too unfair to them, but they have, everybody has limited time, right? And you're going to take your money and take your talents to wherever works best for you. A lot of the time that's not going to be directly interacting with the blockchain. I mean, there's lots of good progress being made with that. But the really large traditional market makers, a lot of them are still just dipping their toes, right? They're pretty skeptical about a lot of, blockchain and cryptocurrencies in general, right? So I think anything that we can do to help them is going to be really impactful as well.
So, so one way to do that is basically to provide more and more tools, open source tools, so that they can easily integrate. And as you said, and I guess one way, basically what we're saying at the core is that we need to abstract out differences between centralized exchanges and decentralized ones, so that they are there, they provide additional guarantees, but they are invisible. So market makers can just come without extra friction, and even more above everyone else, the users, so that we can onboard them more easily, and without confusing them with complex concepts they don't commonly see elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I was really surprised to hear that some questions you guys get are still around slippage and things like that. I guess that power users in this space are much more used to concepts such as yield farming and much more. But that's probably I don't know, top 10% or something like that of the users we have on decentralized exchanges. So. Yeah. I have a question mostly for Steven and Deniz, since Asaf has already answered, which is if we think of this process of abstracting out complexities and differences, what are you doing on your platforms, on your respective platforms, to facilitate that? Are you trying to avoid linking external resources that are commonly used but may be perceived as too complex, or is there anything else specifically that you're thinking about where you made a choice of doing something non-obvious just to simplify the user experience?
There's some really basic stuff, nothing really fancy that we're doing right now. Like, just because we're running on EOS, we're going to stake on behalf of users for all transactions. Okay. Like a really funny thing for a user coming from a centralized exchange to EOS, as Asaf mentioned earlier on. Okay, so first of all, it's really burdensome for them to even get an EOS account, right? You can either go and pay like a 5x premium for what it actually costs in EOS, or you can send it from an EOS exchange or something like this, right? So we'd like to solve that too by maybe even just giving away EOS accounts, because that's a really good CPA, like $2 maybe to acquire a user if they become verified or something, you give them an account. But staking on behalf of users, yeah, if you come from a centralized exchange and then, okay, you've had to pay for the account, maybe it makes sense to you that it's for proof of stake. And then, you know, you have to pay for this RAM. It's a small amount, but you got to pay for the RAM just to store the record for your account in that smart contract. Like, it's a really foreign concept. Oh, okay, you want me to come and trade with you, but you're going to make me pay for the privilege, right? So simple things like that are a good place to start, and kind of abstracting them away, and then allow the power users, if they want to, I mean, they're going to have the funds anyway to up the amount of resources that they have.
Yeah. We've been addressing the issue nonstop on EOS. CPU is the first thing on the list. It's a barrier that most users don't even understand, especially if they're coming from centralized exchanges, or if they come from Ethereum. The fact that now you have this like extra cost, and sometimes like the funny part on EOS was that sometimes you could not execute the add CPU transaction because you didn't have enough CPU. So this is like a deadlock on its own, and you know, users need to users do not need to go through this process. That's for sure. Like, we as projects, we have to accommodate this, and we have to find ways in making the journey as user friendly as possible, because otherwise we'll be the only ones using the system, and obviously that's not the goal of any of the companies here.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we've come a long way. I mean, I got in early 2016. If you guys remember what a DApp, I don't know, like a DApp store or something, it looked ridiculous. It was so primitive. And then we had the Ether deltas, and now we've come to the point where if you look at a decentralized exchange, it's pretty much like the left-hand field where you put in how much you want to sell, the right-hand field where how much you want to buy. You drop down which tokens you want, press swap, and basically that's it, you know. So it's been simplified a lot, and I think it's just gonna, with the collaborative effort of like all you guys, and we're just like incrementally making it slightly easier, just pushing out what doesn't need to, you know, come forward as a user experience backwards. And I think, you know, we're on the right track, even though it looks slow sometimes from the outside.
Yeah, I think we're coming in, like looking at the technology level that exists on centralized entities, and moving into Ethereum and EOS, and all of a sudden everything is slow. Everything, it costs money. Everything is a bit more difficult, and it's a switch. It's like living today and forcing someone to use dial-up on their internet connection. Like, it's something that, you know, you need to understand that there is pain in the process, and there is like some process of learning as well. Obviously, we don't want to stay in a dial-up mode for much longer, but this is what our users are experiencing, and we need to be accepting of this and embrace them as much as we can in the process.
Cool. So my next question is about cross-chain. And since we are discussing how to abstract out complexities that confuse users, I've just checked on CoinMarketCap, and actually 7 or 8 of the first 10 cryptocurrencies, if we check, you know, by volume, by different metrics, basically, or, you know, by market cap and so on, they don't live on a single chain. They are not on Ethereum, they are not on EOS. I mean, Tether is one exception, but, you know, there are very few others. So those users that you guys are onboarding, aren't they confused by this? I mean, basically, it's about offering them an alternative to centralized exchanges, which is better, safer, and has less friction for the onboarding and so on. But isn't this like a big pain point? And do you often get the question from users on why cannot I trade, I don't know, Bitcoin Cash or, you know, XRP or Bitcoin is obvious, right? Because we know this is something that people have been looking to do. But what about those other coins on the top of the, you know, high cap list? Is this a pain point? And how much do you think cross-chain will be required to abstract out complexity and give to users, the cryptocurrencies they want to trade?
Well, they can have PBTC, right? Or they can have, whatever alternatives that are coming onto Ethereum. So the way we see it from Ethereum, because you have all these cross-chain like links now with REM protocol, and they're bringing Zcash and they're bringing all these other assets into Ethereum. Well, if you want a margin trade, you want to lend, you want to borrow any of these assets, you couldn't have natively done it on that chain either, but now you can do it on Ethereum, and you have the whole DeFi infrastructure to play around with these, whatever top 10 tokens you actually want. That's just one opinion I had about what you just said.
And what about if you try to go beyond like Bitcoin? Do you have demand from users for those other tokens? Because I feel like people using DeFi, especially at the beginning, maybe now not as much so, but I think till a few months ago, people using like DeFi on Ethereum were mostly, Ethereum users that were mostly interested around the Ethereum ecosystem. And on EOS, maybe it's something similar. So are those users increasingly interested? Are they more general purpose and less Ethereum specific, less EOS specific? Are we going, in your opinion, in a direction where basically the underlying blockchain is not as important as it used to be? It's not a walled garden. And is there any interest that you already see beyond Bitcoin?
I mean, okay, in terms of, for example, Bitcoin is a good example, where because it's valuable as collateral on Ethereum as well, there is demand to it. Now for other ones, I think we're about to find out whether there is demand, but my bet is that if there is fundamental value happening there and that token is somehow accruing value, if it does capture value, then you would want like a synthetic version of it or some kind of locked up like version of it. So I can see if crypto expands, and it's not just Ethereum expanding or EOS expanding, just a few expanding, and they all expand, then I can see like this flow of assets, not just to Ethereum. Right now, I think it's mostly these assets are coming into Ethereum, but in a future phase where they're all being exchanged and each blockchain is using that asset for whatever it specializes in, whatever it's best at, if it's the fastest, if it's the most secure, whatever.
I think you have two approaches on this. Basically, the first one is being blockchain agnostic. And I think, well, from Bancor's perspective, we've been trying to get to a blockchain agnostic position, and we've actually we are able to deploy Bancor Network and connect Bancor Network across every blockchain that supports smart contracts. So this was like the way of thought that led us to be blockchain agnostic, because we realized that people can come from all these different blockchains. Eventually, they don't care if the token exists on Ethereum, or if it's on EOS, or if it's on ETC, or if it's on RSK. Like it doesn't, like the end user doesn't care. The same way they don't care if your website is hosted on Amazon or on Google Cloud. Like it's not something that they care about. Obviously, we as a protocol, we are more blockchain agnostic, but at the same time, there are projects that come in and make the bridge in terms of tokenized assets. So like pToken, for example, it's a good example. It's like bringing the audiences closer until the market matures even more. So DeFi is very evolved on Ethereum, not as much on other blockchains at the moment. So pToken serves a really good point, does do a really good service in that sense, because they bring assets from different blockchains into Ethereum, into the DeFi ecosystem, and allow people to participate in this game using these assets. So it's something that they were that was not accessible before, and now using projects like yourself is now available for users, and makes a lot of sense in that in the situation, I would say.
Yeah, I guess the only thing that I would add to that is just like from the perspective of a business, of a DApp, if we're looking at it like that, it's just a really nice way, pTokens anyway, to sidestep this problem of okay, now we're going to deploy another smart contract and another pool of collateral to this chain and this chain and this chain and this chain, which is, you know, a huge amount of work. And maybe ultimately those kind of things are required long-term, depending on what it is you're trying to do. But being able to get from here to there, or being able to service the communities of different blockchains right now by using something like pTokens is just really, really valuable.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is basically similarly abstracting out, right, the complexity of the underlying asset. And I never thought, and actually I love the example that Asaf made on the websites, saying users of a website don't care whether it's hosted you know, on Amazon Web Service, on Azure, or wherever else. They shouldn't. Why? I mean, it's just extra, it's a technical detail, right? So similarly, I guess traders don't really care where, to which blockchain a given crypto asset belongs to, as long as they can trade it on their platform of choice. So pTokens are, you know, trying to abstract out this complexity. So it's great to know that you guys are focusing on like simplifying the user experience and sort of hiding the underlying complexity of a chain. So going forward, what I think we are all saying is that basically people will not even notice that they are on a specific chain. They will just say EOSfinex works really well for my needs. So we stay there, I can trade everything there, or Kyber or Bancor. So they will have no need to just move to, you know, they will use it just as yet another exchange. And they will do maybe market making across different blockchains and things like that. Indeed, one of the way we normally define ourselves as pTokens is like a tool to enable cross-chain DeFi composability. So we have not said anything around composability. So my next question is around that. Like, do you currently rely on any other decentralized protocol or decentralized platform tool to make your decentralized exchange work? Do you have any integration that benefits from having something else on the same blockchain, for instance? And would you potentially benefit from having the possibility to interoperate with other blockchains? I guess one first answer that is quite obvious is simplifying, widening the scope for market makers, so they can do market making not just across different decentralized exchanges on the same platform, or across centralized and decentralized ones, but also across different blockchains more easily. But is there anything else that you see would potentially be enabled by using those Lego bricks from across different blockchains?
Well, it's certainly going to help. My answer would be pretty quick to that, because obviously we're at a much earlier stage than Kyber or Bancor in terms of this. Our first efforts really at composability are going to be with pTokens, right? But the potential for it obviously is amazing, and in bringing outside markets in, and not telling them that, okay, you need to do this for this chain, and you need to do that for that chain, and you're going to need to do 10 different things. I think it's really, really important that developments in IBC and things like this, that they come quickly. They can be really impactful right now.
Yeah, and it's good that you mentioned the Lego money, or I don't know if you said money Lego, because that's even a Kyber. We've been amazed to see just how true it's been that all those Lego pieces can be connected together to create these different kind of services that we hadn't really imagined. Okay, with the farming yield as well, but there's streaming money, and there's all these leverage trading you can do, and there's so many different pieces. There might be 3, 4, 5 different pieces in that chain, and everything specializing in one of that different pieces. And I think it's great that it's happened, but for now, for us, we've seen it as it happened within Ethereum, because in terms of composability, we still think that being able to settle the whole transaction, stick all these, and have settlement within the next transaction, so either all happens or doesn't happen, kind of really only happens when you're on Ethereum and you're completely on chain. And it's important that you actually are on chain as well. Even like 0x is not really on chain. Therefore, it's much harder to use it as a Lego money within something like Neural Network or Instadap or DeFi Saver or any of these, which require it to happen within one transaction. You know, that's how I see it.
So Bancor is fully on chain in that sense, and really we've been always exclusive in that sense that we do not try to have any centralized component to the ecosystem. With the development of pToken and the accessibility of new blockchain into Ethereum in that sense, what we've seen is a good service to our users, because now we have more users that can have access to tokens from different blockchains. So this is type of activity that we're very happy to see and we're very happy to accept. There is one development that we're working on and about to release at the early to mid July. It's actually Bancor V2, which is the first time that we are partnering with Chainlink in order to create a new pool, like AMM pool design. And we're using a decentralized oracles in order to identify prices of different tokens in different pools. And this will enable us to leverage this this technology into creating a new design of AMMs, which basically allows you to have a single token staking, which means maintain your long position on token. So if someone is a believer in PBTC and they want to maintain their long position, but at the same time, they want to put it to work, this is what Bancor V2 is allowing them. Is allowing them to you know, fulfill the original AMM promise, where you could stake your favorite token into a liquidity pool and generate fees on top of that. And this is exactly what we're aiming to do with Bancor V2, allowing PBTC users to come in, maintain their long position in a specific pool, and generate fees on top of that. And that's due to a relationship that we have with Chainlink and the connection that we can create across decentralized entities in the blockchain.
Excellent. So something I was sort of thinking while Deniz was speaking is like this constraint of atomicity that we currently have for most composed tools within the same blockchain. So this is like this makes it possible to create very complex transactions on Ethereum and do like for example, give guarantees to market makers, for instance, that use a single blockchain. So they just say, as we were previously mentioning, if those conditions hold, then do that sequence of trades. If not, just cancel the transaction because there is not the opportunity I expected anymore. So don't do anything. And this is all possible thanks to the atomicity of transactions. We have same property on pretty much every blockchain that supports smart contracts. But when we leave the walled garden of the single blockchain, in some cases with oracles as well, in others just by via other tools that enable cross-chain composability, we don't have this atomicity anymore. So we cannot really do just atomic transactions. It's a multi-step process. How will the users perceive this? I mean, this is very complex, right? Because over time, users were not used to this like atomicity of transactions, and we had to make a lot of work, education work mostly, to explain them. Transactions on Ethereum are atomic, so flash loans work just because of atomicity of transactions, and it's possible to do either everything or nothing and things like that. Now, going forward, being an increasing amount of complexity thanks to all the different blockchains out there and all these different tools, I think this will change. We see it also in other projects, for instance, another one that comes to my mind is like Loopring. Loopring sort of moves from one walled garden, which is the Ethereum blockchain, to a second layer, the the funds of the users. So they are they live elsewhere. So they don't really leverage composability while they are there. They may when they come back, but they live on a different chain. And this is similar to what EOSfinex was experimenting with initially with their side chain, right? With their alternative chain on EOS. And then they decided to move to the main blockchain. So maybe this is a good question also for Steven, I guess. Do you think that going forward, atomicity will not be something like guaranteed anymore? And how much do you think those tools will interoperate? Do you think they will eventually interoperate, meaning that maybe in several transactions, different platforms speak to each other and do something, or do you think this atomicity constraint will keep being a constraint and we'll just live with it as we are currently doing? I don't know if you got the question. It's quite complicated, but it's around understanding if the atomicity property is something we should rely on, or if you think it will need to disappear.
I think if it does, it's got to be really niche, right? Because it's I feel like anytime you're introducing that level of complexity into trying to run, like you're trying to run a service. As we mentioned before, you're trying to abstract away this kind of complexity, right? And you're trying to then run a service across multiple chains. If you have that sort of complexity in there, then I feel like it's just an uphill battle, you know? I don't know if that's going away anytime soon.
And you can probably
the problems with it, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at how it works now for PBTC, when I go make a transaction, I don't need to have the minting process baked into it, right? That already has happened. So, because that's what the use case needs. So I'm not sure what kind of use case we'll need in the future that will require the transfer of that value and then the processing of that within the same transaction.
Okay. What we've done, again, we've experimented with a lot of different things. So I feel like we've done something on any question that you have. Sorry to kind of be blunt on this, but not all our things are successful, but we do have experience in how to address them. In regards to cross-chain activity and transfer of value, what we've identified is that there is a different terminology between decentralized and non-custodial. I think in 2017 we spoke about decentralized, and towards the end, like end of 2019, people start shifting into non-custodial. And what we've done with Bancor, Bancor X, the bridge that we have, is basically we allow the users to create 2 transactions. So we trigger one after the other. The first one is on blockchain A, and the second one is on blockchain B. And behind the scene, there's like all this complex ecosystem that's working in getting the transaction moving, or the value moving from blockchain A to blockchain B in that sense. I think, user interface is simplified as much as possible, but at the end of the day, it still requires 2 transactions to be executed. What we are doing at Bancor is we create a single unified wallet using the same 12 words. So a single signature actually serves all the blockchains that exist in the ecosystem. And this allows us to have the user sign once. And this is where we kind of move in from like decentralized into non-custodial, because we do have one single service that save the transactions on the client side, and then trigger them one after the other. So once the first transaction is completed, we already have the next following signed transaction, and we execute it following that. So for the user perspective, it's a very easy process. It's almost like there's almost no barrier. But then it goes into finality that you've mentioned. What happens if the transaction doesn't work, or there's like a fork in the process? These type of things do affect the users, and eventually they get sometimes they get stuck in limbo. And then you have to communicate it very well, and you have to address it. So the system is not, I think it's always going to be there at this point, as far as I can see. It's just a matter of how you address it and how you educate the audience and how they accept this challenge in the process.
Cool, very interesting. So it's basically what we said is that it's really complicated, and I liked you said that many things we mentioned were done by or experimented with by Bancor, but not everything is successful. So what we see today, DeFi, is like a new term that is sort of containing in itself like many previous failed attempts to implement what decentralized finance is today. I mean, decentralized finance was like a thing since the very beginning of of blockchain, of Ethereum, of smart contracts. But we have invented the term just recently, like a couple of years ago, 1 year ago, 2 years ago, just because it's getting more and more traction. And I guess this is mostly because user experience is slow. We are learning by making mistakes and by trying and breaking things, what works and what doesn't, and what's the user experience, what's the way to explain to users new concepts and things like that. So I think that going forward, this will be like increasingly important, as we said, so abstracting out complexities and just giving to users additional guarantees without asking them to do too much extra effort. Like if we go back and look at dApps from like 2016 or even earlier, today, as we said, they look ridiculous, just because their UX is so different from the one we see today that I'm really surprised when I go on like your websites and I see that it looks like Shapeshift basically, and Shapeshift was not decentralized, but it was trivial to use. And it got so many users. Now Shapeshift is not, as used as it used to be, mostly because there are alternatives that are, they are cheaper, they are better, they are safer, and they are decentralized. So, but the user experience is really similar. It's astonishing, how similar it is, regardless of the additional complexity that we have, under the hood that is actually, powering it. So yeah, it was really interesting. And while you guys were speaking, I was thinking of these past examples of projects that today we don't see really, being used that much anymore, which were previous steps that sort of made DeFi possible by saying what people wanted, what people liked, what they didn't, and things like that. Now, what I think we could do for some minutes is answering to at least a couple of questions from the audience. So there is a question from a user that defines himself as non-techie, and he's saying that like knowledge transfer is highly required, and that whoever leads mass education will be extremely helpful for educating people like him. And he's saying that like CoinMarketCap plays one point of place for all crypto tokens, so you can find all the information there. But he's asking if there is any platform you guys would recommend for DeFi protocols. He's aware of DeFi pools. He's asking if there are like others where he could learn additional things on mass adoption. So I don't know if you guys want to share any resource that you may have created or any website you like, where like the average Joe can get to learn more around DeFi or around these challenges and this new generation of platforms.
I mean, I can recommend joining this Telegram group called the DeFi group, and over there's like the founders, the developers, everyone who's involved in the DeFi space is basically in that group, and you see amazing discussions come out. People post articles and Twitter, tweets and everything. And there's a lot of discussion there. So I would highly recommend that as one other source, apart from DeFi Pulse, which is great as well. Yeah, that I can post that link afterwards as well.
I think what Deniz is saying is correct, because there are a lot of different sites that provide information for learning and understanding DeFi, but I think at the end of the day, it's such an acceptive community that if you go to the right Telegram group or the right Discord group, you'll have a good access to a lot of first-hand knowledge. You'll be able to ask any question you want, and I think the groups educate people the fastest in that sense, because you have this direct communication with all these people with vast majority of information. And you can really create yourself or educate yourself in the process of listening and learning from other people. So it's very much a P2P experience that you can have.
Yeah,
Cool.
I wouldn't add anything to that. I think crypto Twitter is your best bet always. Like, yeah.
Yeah, the crypto Twitter, I guess it's another good question. But all the ones that were mentioned are actually very good resources to get started. And we didn't give probably enough credit to it, but also like there are many Discord channels where from the different projects where you can actually dive deeper if you're interested in something specific, and you can similarly just read what other users are writing and learn really fast. Basically, you can see like really expert users that get to discuss very complex topics. So this sort of forces you to learn new things, because they use terms you don't understand. They reference external projects, external resources. So I feel like the right Discord groups, Telegram, and Twitter are like resources that are really powerful and can get you started into this super exciting rabbit hole, which is DeFi. Another question from the YouTube this time is Bitmax asks, why is impermanent loss a problem in AMM? Does anyone want to take that?
I think Asaf,
yeah, I think
this be your area of expertise as the AMM.
Yeah, so what we've discovered on AMM is that once you have two or more assets or deposited into a liquidity pool, basically when there is a price change in one of these underlying assets, this creates an arbitrage opportunity for someone to come in and take this excess value. And this activity, this arbitrage activity, it's something we call the price reserve rebalancing, is basically what causes impermanent loss. The fact that someone is benefiting from any price changes in the market and taking these tokens outside of the pool cause losses for liquidity providers. And as a result, making, I would say, adding liquidity into a liquidity pool almost like a not smart decision. And that's why really at Bancor, again, I'm emphasizing the fact that we've been in the ecosystem for some time. We've been working against these or with these challenges for a very good amount of time. And that kind of pushed us to reinvent the AMM and the way we think about it, and make the decision of really trying to find a solution where AMM can really make good on their promise, where you can stake one token and have no impermanent loss in the sense of it. I think, from my perspective, Bancor V2, which is launching in the next couple of weeks, is something really interesting in the ecosystem. It's really the stuff of the AMM, and I'm very excited to see this unfold.
Cool. So let me see if there is any other question from the crowd that we could answer. I think I will go with one last question to wrap up. So we have covered very different topics and several aspects of DeFi and of decentralized exchanges. So I just wanted to do a round of one last round with this question, where I ask to each one of you, if you have any innovation that you have seen around in the space or that you are about to release that you are especially excited about? And like if you have any final thought that you would like to share that we have not covered previously. Maybe we could start with Steven.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't know if there's a specific company that I'm super interested in right now. I mean, there's a lot. Generally, for me though, the trend in wallet adoption is the thing that's really interesting to me. And you know, like we're always struggling with this idea now. It's like one of the problems to lift decentralized trading and other dApps off the ground is this really steep learning curve in the wallet, in non-custodial wallets and keys and so on. And I guess the conversation always is that this is a really big problem, you know. But you know, as with the history of any other, call it like disruptive innovation, the progress is being made really slowly and really steadily, you know. And ultimately, I really feel like the user experience there is going to be superior. You know, if you look at examples like, you know, if you want to trade this token on one exchange and that token on another exchange, and they don't happen to be supported, it's so easy right now to just land on a web page, click a button, 20 seconds later you can trade. And then you could go to another exchange a minute later and trade the other token. And that's the kind of, I mean, if you come from product management or marketing and you're like constantly obsessive about user funnels and acquisition and conversion, that's the kind of acquisition and conversion that you would dream of. I mean, it's unheard of, right? If you were able to have Amazon one click, but even better, basically, and you can apply that to any business, I think that's going to be really exciting.
Anyone else wants to answer? Maybe Deniz next.
Yeah, I mean, personally, what I'm excited about is the launching of the Kyber DAO, because we're going to see for the first time like a dApp which has like tens of thousands of users incorporate this governance piece onto it. And there's a few different projects doing this as well, and it's really exciting times. I think the first 6 months of 2020 where this has really kicked off, and we're just looking forward to see how that works, because from our perspective, we're giving control of the kind of the fee distribution model to the wisdom of the crowd, and they're going to kind of decide how it works, and it's being represented by different stakeholders, from professional market makers to the community, to wallets that are integrated with Kyber, to DeFi apps that are integrated to Kyber. There's so many different moving pieces, and I'm just excited to see how it plays out, and I'm really looking forward to growing that piece at Kyber.
So for us at Bancor, we're very excited. First of all, you've asked what is exciting about the ecosystem. I'm very excited about the DEX aggregators, because the way I see funnels, Stephen, is slightly different knowing blockchain. And this is really like something recent that I've discovered is basically you don't need front end. You don't really need a front end. You can have a front end, but you don't really need to. Because all these DEX aggregators, what they do is they access the blockchain level, and they create their own front end, and they create their own accessibility into the blockchain technology. And that kind of leaves us, and I think Kyber as well, in the place where we can focus on really making the best solution, smart contract designs on the blockchain level. And everyone else can access them. And this is the beauty of decentralized exchanges and DeFi as a whole. For us at Bancor, the one thing that is really exciting from our perspective is the upcoming launch of Bancor V2 mid-July. This is a new AMM design using oracles from Chainlink that is designed to do 3 major things. First of all is single token staking, so you can stay long on your token. Second thing is really eliminating impermanent loss, which is the pain point of AMM. And really like fulfilling the original promise of AMM, where you can stake or you can stay long on your token, on your favorite token, stake it in a liquidity pool and generate revenues in the process. And the last thing is really like a technology improvement that we're doing that is liquidity amplification within the liquidity pool. that is reducing slippage dramatically. And this kind of ties it back into DEX aggregators, because this will enable Bancor and any V2 pool to be very, very competitive in trades and support almost any, or actually win almost every trade existing out there. So this combination is like super exciting. It's really disruptive to the AMM, and I'm kind of eager to see it out already.
Cool, exciting. So I will wrap up the discussion with some final thoughts on this front, connecting to what Asaf was saying. And basically, these DEX aggregators, as we were previously saying, they sort of leverage the fact that there are different platforms on the same blockchain. So it's sort of like saying that like DeFi is forcing platforms by design to be transparent and to be potentially interoperable. So this gives like power to new platforms and new tools to just work together and be connected as Lego bricks. And the role that I'm personally really interested to fit here is the one of enabling this logic across blockchains. So being able to basically connect these different Lego bricks across different blockchains, so you can have like DEX aggregators or other tools that communicate across different blockchains. So users will really just stop caring on which blockchain they are, and they will simply use the platform on which the best job is done in abstracting out the complexity and on which they prefer. On centralized exchanges, we know there are several, right? And people stick to the ones they like the most, on the ones they feel safer, on which they are more confident, or it is more in line with their users, a profile or persona. So I feel like with a truly, leveled out playing field across blockchains, it will be much easier for users to do decisions on which platform to use. Right now, they're really restricted, right? They need to, they say, if I want to trade ETH, then I can use those platforms. If I want to trade EOS or those other tokens, I will stay on EOS, and so on. I'm looking at my notes to see how many different topics we have covered, and we have really covered a lot. So thank you guys for sharing all your knowledge here and your thoughts. It was really interesting, and thank you for taking the time and for joining this panel. And hopefully you will be guests in our community calls also in the future. Thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you guys. See you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.